The lawyer's voice was steady, professional, almost bored as he read my father's will. To my son, Jonathan Reed, I leave the entirety of my estate. Reed Industries, all properties, investment portfolios, and liquid assets totaling approximately $847 million. I sat in that mahogany-paneled office, hands folded in my lap, wearing the black dress I'd bought for my father's funeral 3 days earlier. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I didn't do what everyone expected me to do. I smiled, because in that moment, I understood something my father had spent 32 years trying to teach me. The world doesn't reward fairness. It rewards power. And if you're born without it, you have to take it. This isn't a confession. It's a blueprint. My name is Katherine Reed. Most people who knew my father called me Kate. Jonathan, my older brother by 18 months, called me little sister, with that particular tone that made it sound like a diagnosis rather than a term of endearment. I'm 32 years old. I have an MBA from Wharton, a decade of experience in private equity, and a mind that my father once described as sharp enough to be dangerous if you were a man. That last part matters. Remember it. What you're about to hear is how I stopped being the daughter who wasn't enough and became the woman who took everything. Some of you will call me a monster. Others will take notes. Either way, you'll listen to the end. Because deep down, you want to know, if someone cut you out of your own legacy because of something you couldn't control, would you have the stomach to do what I did? Let me be clear from the start. I loved my father. I also hated him. Both things can be true when you spend your entire life trying to earn something that was never yours to win. Jonathan and I were born into old money, the kind that comes with expectations and traditions and rules written in invisible ink. The Reed family had built a fortune in manufacturing, then pivoted to commercial real estate in the 1980s. By the time my father took over from my grandfather in 1995, we were worth hundreds of millions. I need you to understand where this started. Not in the lawyer's office in 2024, but in a study with leather-bound books and the smell of cigar smoke in 1998. I was 6 years old, and I'd just brought home my report card. Straight A's. Every subject. The teacher had written a note. Katherine is exceptionally gifted in mathematics and logic. I remember running into my father's study, so proud, so eager to show him. He was reviewing contracts with Jonathan, who was 7.5 and barely passing the second grade. "Daddy, look." I thrust the report card at him. He glanced at it, smiled briefly, and said, "That's very nice, Katie. Why don't you go show your mother?" Then he turned back to Jonathan. "Now, as I was saying, son, a Reed man needs to understand leverage. When someone needs something from you, that's when you have power." I stood there, report card in hand, and watched my father teach my mediocre brother the secrets of our empire, while my exceptional grades earned me a pat on the head and a redirect to my mother. That was the first time I understood. But I was 6, so I told myself I was wrong. Our childhood was a masterclass in invisible prejudice. It wasn't that my father was cruel. It was that he was traditional. He believed in an order to things. Men built. Women supported. Sons inherited. Daughters married well. Jonathan and I went to the same private schools. We had the same tutors. But our educations diverged in subtle, devastating ways. When Jonathan turned 13, my father started bringing him to board meetings. "He needs to learn the business," my father would say. I was 11. I begged to come too. "Sweetie, you wouldn't find it interesting. It's very boring, lots of numbers and contracts." I was getting straight A's in advanced mathematics. Jonathan was getting C's in basic algebra. When we were teenagers, Jonathan got a summer internship at Reed Industries. I got sent to a finishing school in Switzerland, where I learned to set a proper table and carry on conversation at diplomatic dinners. I learned. I became fluent in 5 languages. I studied the other girls' families, their power structures, their business empires. I watched how their fathers and brothers treated them, some better than mine, most the same. And I began to understand that this wasn't about my father being uniquely terrible. This was about a system, a tradition, an order that men like my father believed in so deeply they couldn't even see it as a choice. My mother died when I was 17. Ovarian cancer that she caught too late because she'd been too busy managing my father's household to prioritize her own health. At the funeral, people told me I looked just like her. They meant it as a compliment. I heard it as a warning. I got my bachelor's from Yale. Finance and economics. Summa cum laude. Jonathan went to Princeton and graduated with a 2.9 GPA after my father made several generous donations to ensure his continued enrollment. I got my MBA from Wharton, top 5% of my class, recruited by 3 major investment banks. I took a job at Goldman Sachs. Not because my father got it for me, because I earned it. Jonathan went straight into Reed Industries as VP of Strategic Development, a title my father created for him. His strategic development consisted of taking clients to golf and rubber-stamping decisions my father had already made. I spent my 20s building a reputation. I closed deals. I made my clients money. I was known as one of the sharpest analysts in New York. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. I was too busy proving something to an audience of one who never seemed to be watching. When I was 28, I approached my father about joining Reed Industries. I'd just closed a $300 million real estate deal for a client. I had a portfolio of successful projects. I had ideas for expanding the company into new markets. We had lunch at his club. Old wood, old paintings, old men. "Daddy, I want to come work for you. I can help Jonathan modernize the..." "Katie." He set down his scotch. "You've done wonderfully at your job. I'm very proud. But Reed Industries is Jonathan's future. That's how it's always been in our family. The son inherits the company. You'll inherit plenty when the time comes. Enough to be comfortable. I don't want to be comfortable. I want to build something. Then build a family. You're 28. You should be thinking about marriage, children. The Reed legacy needs heirs." I sat there, in that club full of men who looked like my father, and I felt something inside me turn cold and hard. I can provide heirs and run a company. Men do it all the time. My father smiled. That sad, patronizing smile. "It's different for women, sweetheart. You'd be dividing your focus. Jonathan can dedicate himself fully. It's not about ability. It's about biology. About nature." That was the moment. Not when I became a villain. When I stopped believing in heroes. Because my father genuinely believed what he was saying. He looked at me, his brilliant, accomplished daughter, and saw a waste of ambition. An aberration. A woman trying to be something nature hadn't designed her to be. I finished my lunch. I smiled. I kissed his cheek. And I went back to New York and started planning. For years passed. I stayed at Goldman. I made partner at 30. I dated a man named David for 2 years, a corporate lawyer, smart, ambitious. He proposed. I said yes because it seemed like the next logical step. 3 months before the wedding, he sat me down in our apartment. "Kate, I've been thinking. After we're married, maybe you could step back from work. Not quit, just reduce your hours. My career is really taking off, and I'd like to start a family soon. It doesn't make sense for both of us to be working 80-hour weeks." I looked at him. This man I'd thought I loved. This man who'd seemed different. "Why me?" I asked. "Why should I be the one to step back?" "Because you're the woman. Because you'd be the mother. It's just natural." I broke off the engagement that night. David seemed genuinely confused about what he'd done wrong. I was 31, single, and tired. So tired of proving myself. So tired of being exceptional and having it mean nothing. Then my father got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. They gave him 6 months. He lasted 8. I flew home to Greenwich every weekend. I sat by his bedside. I read to him. I held his hand while he slipped in and out of consciousness. Jonathan visited twice in those 8 months. He was too busy with the company. My father made excuses for him. In his final week, my father was lucid for a few hours. I was alone with him. "Katie," he whispered, "you turned out just fine. Your mother would be proud." "Daddy, I want to talk about the company. About my future there." He patted my hand. "Jonathan will take care of you. He'll make sure you're provided for. That's what family does." "But Daddy, I could help him run it." "I could. Shoo. Don't worry about business, sweetheart. Women shouldn't have to carry that burden. It's not your fault you were born female. You just have to make the best of it." He said it with love. With pity. Like he was comforting me about a terminal diagnosis. He died 3 days later. Which brings us back to that lawyer's office. The mahogany panels. The bored voice reading my father's will. Jonathan got everything. The company worth $600 million. The property's worth another $200 million. The investment portfolios, the art collection, the yacht, the estate. I got $5 million in a trust. To ensure Catherine's financial security and comfort. $5 million. Less than 0.6% of the estate. Enough to be comfortable, as my father had promised. Not enough to matter. The lawyer finished reading. Jonathan stood up, already making calls, already talking about restructuring and fresh perspectives. I sat very still. Everyone expected me to cry, to contest the will, to make a scene about unfairness. I did none of those things, because I'd learned something from my father after all. He'd taught me, inadvertently, that the world respects power, not fairness. That inheritance isn't about deserving. It's about taking. He'd given Jonathan the company because Jonathan was a man. I was going to take it because I was smarter. I gave myself 24 hours to grieve. Not for my father. I'd grieved him years ago when I realized he'd never see me. I grieved for the daughter I'd been, the one who believed merit mattered. Then I opened my laptop and began. First, I researched. Not the company. I already knew Reed Industries inside and out from years of studying it obsessively. I researched Jonathan. My brother was 43 years old. He'd been VP of Strategic Development for 15 years. In that time, he'd made exactly 3 significant business decisions. All 3 had been disasters that my father had quietly fixed. Jonathan was a figurehead, a mascot. He looked good in a suit, said the right things at charity galas, and played golf with clients. He had no strategic vision, no financial acumen, no ability to actually run a company. What he had was confidence, the unearned, unshakable confidence of a man who'd never been told he couldn't do something because of his gender. My father had left him $847 million and complete control of a company he had no ability to manage. It was, I realized, the most expensive participation trophy in history, and I was going to make him choke on it. I spent the first week after the funeral being the perfect grieving daughter. I attended all the memorial events. I smiled sadly at my father's colleagues. I hugged relatives who told me how lucky I was that my father had provided for me. I played the role, the supporting character in my brother's origin story. But I was also watching, observing, collecting information like a magpie collecting shiny things. Reed Industries was a commercial real estate empire built on 3 pillars: office buildings in major cities, luxury residential developments, and a small but profitable property management division. The company had weathered the 2008 crash because my father was conservative, cautious, and smart. Jonathan was none of those things. At the post-funeral reception, I stood near the bar and listened to Jonathan hold court with the board members. The old man was brilliant but conservative, Jonathan was saying, scotch in hand, confidence in every syllable. I'm thinking we need to be more aggressive. Leverage the assets. Think bigger. The board members nodded politely. They'd known Jonathan his whole life. They knew what he was. But he was the boss now. The inheritor. The anointed one. I filed that conversation away. The next morning, I called my contact at Goldman Sachs. Michael, I need a favor. I'm looking into Reed Industries. Specifically, I want to know who their lenders are, what their debt structure looks like, and whether there are any major refinancing events coming up. Michael was quiet for a moment. Kate, that's your family's company. I know. I'm concerned about Jonathan's ability to manage it. Just between us. 3 days later, Michael sent me a file. What I learned was beautiful. Reed Industries had $200 million in debt spread across 3 major loans. All 3 loans had balloon payments coming due in the next 18 months. My father had been planning to refinance them before he died. Jonathan didn't even know they existed. This was my opening. But I needed more than an opening. I needed a strategy. I flew back to New York and called my former colleague, Sarah Chen. Sarah had left Goldman 2 years earlier to start her own private equity fund. She was ruthless, brilliant, and had no patience for incompetence. We met at her office in Midtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Power in every detail. I need to acquire my father's company, I told her. But I can't do it openly. If Jonathan knows I'm behind it, he'll fight it out of spite. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying me. You want to buy Reed Industries without your brother knowing you're the buyer? I want to create a situation where selling to me is his only option. And I want him to think it was his idea. Sarah smiled. Tell me more. I laid out the basics. The debt structure. Jonathan's incompetence. The upcoming balloon payments. He's going to try to refinance, I said. But he doesn't have my father's relationships. He doesn't have the credibility. If the refinancing fails, he'll be forced to sell assets or bring in an investor. And you want to be that investor. I want to be the investor who eventually owns the whole thing. But first, I need to make sure the refinancing fails. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, you want me to poison the well. Make sure every bank we have relationships with knows that Reed Industries is a bad risk under Jonathan's leadership. I want you to share concerns. As a colleague, as someone who knows the industry. That's not illegal, but it's definitely brutal. My brother inherited $847 million because he has a Y chromosome. I'm done being polite. Sarah extended her hand. I want 20% equity in whatever we build from this. Done. The thing about finance is that it runs on relationships and reputation. Jonathan had neither. Over the next 3 months, I orchestrated a symphony of subtle sabotage. Nothing illegal. Nothing traceable. Just strategic conversations. Sarah's fund started passing on deals that Reed Industries was pitching. When asked why, Sarah would say, I'm not confident in the current leadership's ability to execute. I reached out to 3 of my father's oldest banking relationships. Not to badmouth Jonathan, just to express concerns about the transition. My father had such strong instincts, I'd say over lunch. Jonathan is different. More aggressive. I just hope he's not taking on too much risk too fast. I planted seeds of doubt, then stepped back and watched them grow. Meanwhile, Jonathan was busy being Jonathan. He pushed for a massive luxury development in Miami that would require $150 million in new financing. He ignored his CFO's concerns about overextension. He fired the company's longtime general counsel for being too conservative. He was a child playing with his father's toys, convinced he was a master builder. By month 4, the whispers had become a chorus. Reed Industries' credit rating was downgraded. Not because of anything concrete, because of concerns about management transition and strategic direction. The refinancing negotiations began. And stalled. And stalled again. Jonathan started making calls, burning through his father's relationships with desperate, aggressive asks. He didn't understand that banking is like dating. Desperation is repellent. I watched from New York. Patient. Invisible. Waiting. 6 months after my father's death, Jonathan called me. Katie, I need to talk to you about something. We met for dinner at his club in Greenwich. The same club where my father had told me I should focus on starting a family. Jonathan looked tired. Stressed. The unearned confidence was cracking. The banks are being ridiculous, he said, not even bothering with small talk. They want these insane terms for the refinancing. Higher interest rates, more covenants. It's like they don't trust me. I made my face sympathetic. That's terrible. Daddy had such good relationships with them. Yeah, well, Daddy's dead, and apparently his relationships died with him. I let that sit for a moment. Then, what are you going to do? I'm considering bringing in an investor. Someone who can provide capital and help convince the banks we're stable. This was it. But I couldn't jump too fast. That's a big decision. Daddy built this company from nothing. Are you sure you want to give up equity? I don't have a choice, Kate. The balloon payments are coming due, and if I can't refinance, I'll have to start selling properties at fire sale prices. That would destroy the company's value. I nodded slowly. Who are you thinking of approaching? I've got a few calls out to private equity funds. But they're vultures. They'll want 40–50% of the company for the capital we need. I took a sip of wine. I might know someone who could help. Who? Sarah Chen. She runs a PE fund. We worked together at Goldman. She's tough but fair. And she knew Daddy. She respects the Reed legacy. I watched Jonathan's face. Watched him do the math. A woman introducing him to another woman. Not threatening. Not competition. Just helpful little sister providing a connection. Could you make an introduction? He asked. Of course. That's what family does. Sarah and I had rehearsed this a dozen times. She met with Jonathan alone. Professional. Respectful. She didn't mention me except in passing. Kate speaks very highly of you and your father's vision, Sarah said. I'd love to help preserve that legacy. She offered Jonathan exactly what he needed. $200 million in capital to refinance the debt and fund the Miami development. In exchange, her fund would take 35% equity in Reed Industries and a seat on the board. Jonathan tried to negotiate down to 25%. Sarah held firm. Your sister mentioned you might resist giving up control. But let's be clear, Jonathan. Without this capital, you won't have a company to control. The banks won't refinance under current terms. You need this deal. He signed 2 weeks later. What Jonathan didn't know. Sarah's fund was called Vanguard Capital Partners. The fund's structure was deliberately opaque, common in private equity. The LP investors were shielded behind layers of corporate entities. I was the majority LP investor. I'd used my $5 million inheritance and a significant personal loan to secure 60% of the fund. By acquiring 35% of Reed Industries through Vanguard, I'd effectively acquired 21% of my family's company. Jonathan had no idea, but 21% wasn't enough. Not even close. Remember that Miami development Jonathan was so excited about? The one that required $150 million in financing? It was a disaster waiting to happen. I knew it because I'd spent 3 weeks analyzing the market data. Miami luxury real estate was overvalued. There was a glut of high-end inventory. The project's pro forma returns were based on aggressive assumptions that wouldn't hold. But I didn't tell Jonathan any of this. Neither did Sarah. We let him proceed. Even encouraged him. This could be transformational for the company, Sarah said at a board meeting. High risk, high reward. Construction began in month 8. By month 10, sales were 30% below projections. By month 12, the project was hemorrhaging cash. Jonathan panicked. He started pulling money from other properties to cover the Miami losses. The company's cash position deteriorated. At month 14, Sarah called an emergency board meeting. We have serious concerns about the company's financial stability, she said. The Miami project has cost us $90 million with minimal return. Other properties are being neglected to cover these losses. We need immediate action. The other board members, all friends of my father, all skeptical of Jonathan from the start, nodded grimly. Jonathan looked like a trapped animal. It's a temporary setback. The Miami market will recover. Sarah slid a report across the table. Our analysis suggests it won't recover fast enough. You've put the entire company at risk for one vanity project. It's not a vanity project. Then what would you call a $150 million development that's generated $12 million in sales? The room was silent. Sarah continued, Vanguard Capital Partners is prepared to provide additional capital to stabilize the company, but not under the current management structure. Jonathan's face went white. What are you saying? I'm saying we need professional management. We need to bring in someone who can right the ship. This is my company. My father left it to me. Your father left you a thriving company. You've spent 14 months driving it into the ground. The board has a fiduciary duty to protect the company's value. I watched from New York via video call, my camera off. Watched my brother realize he was losing. Who would you bring in? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled. I have someone in mind. Someone with extensive real estate experience. Someone who knows the Reed legacy intimately. Who? Your sister. The board meeting ended with a vote. Jonathan would remain as chairman, a largely ceremonial role. I would be brought in as CEO with full operational control. Jonathan called me that night, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. You planned this. All of it. The refinancing problems, the Miami development, Sarah Chin. You orchestrated my failure. I could have lied. Could have pretended to be shocked, reluctant, just trying to help. Instead, I told him the truth. Yes. Silence. Then, why? Because you inherited everything for having a Y chromosome, and I got $5 million for having an X chromosome. Because Daddy spent 32 years teaching me I was less valuable than you, no matter what I achieved. Because you've spent your entire life being mediocre and being rewarded for it while I had to be exceptional to get scraps. So you destroyed me? No, Jonathan. I let you destroy yourself. I just made sure I'd be there to pick up the pieces. The board will never approve this. I'll fight it. The board already voted. You were on the call. 4-1 in favor. You were the one. I'll contest it. I'll sue. You'll lose. Sarah's fund owns 35% of the company. We have board control. And if you fight us, we'll trigger the shotgun clause in the shareholder agreement and force you to either buy us out or sell to us. You don't have the capital to buy us out, which means you'll be forced to sell. At a valuation we determine. You'll end up with a fraction of what Daddy left you. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Heard the moment he understood. You're a monster, he said. No, I'm just done being powerless. He hung up. I sat in my apartment, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, and I waited to feel guilty. I didn't. I became CEO of Reed Industries on month 16. My first day, I walked into my father's old office, now my office, and sat in his chair. It fit perfectly. Over the next 6 months, I systematically fixed everything Jonathan had broken. I brought in a new management team. I restructured the Miami project, cutting losses and pivoting to a mixed-use development that actually matched market demand. I rebuilt relationships with lenders, restored the company's credit rating, and implemented financial controls Jonathan had ignored. The company stabilized, then began to grow. Jonathan remained as chairman, attending quarterly board meetings where he said little and voted with the majority. He looked smaller each time I saw him. Diminished. The unearned confidence finally draining away. At month 24, I approached him with a proposal. "I want to buy you out," I said. "Vanguard and I are prepared to offer $450 million for your remaining 65% stake. That's $200 million less than what Daddy left me. The company lost value under your management. But it's $450 million more than you'd have if you'd declared bankruptcy, which is where you were headed. You're stealing my inheritance. I'm offering to pay you nearly $500 million for a company you almost destroyed. Take the deal, Jonathan. Take the money. Start something new. Or don't. But this company isn't yours anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." He took the deal. Not because he wanted to. Because he had no choice. The transaction closed on month 27. I now owned 86% of Reed Industries. Sarah owned the other 14%. I'd done it. I'd taken everything. Victory, I discovered, has a peculiar taste. It's not sweet. It's not bitter. It's just empty. I sat in my corner office, looking at the financial statements showing a company worth $950 million. More than my father had left it. I'd proven I could run it better than Jonathan. Better than my father, if we're being honest. But I'd also proven something else. Something darker. I'd proven I was capable of destroying my own brother. Systematically. Patiently. Without remorse. The whisper campaign that tanked his refinancing? That was me. The Miami development he'd been so excited about? I knew it would fail. I let him proceed anyway. I even encouraged it. I used his incompetence and his arrogance as weapons against him. I'd spent 2 years becoming exactly what I'd accused my father of being. Someone who saw people as pieces on a board, to be moved and sacrificed in service of a larger goal. Sarah visited my office 6 months after the buyout closed. She brought champagne. "To the smartest play I've ever seen," she said, raising her glass. I didn't drink. "Do you think I'm a monster?" Sarah laughed. "I think you're someone who got tired of being cheated and decided to stop playing fair. That's not monstrous. That's rational. I destroyed my brother. Your brother destroyed himself. You just made sure you were there to benefit from it. There's a difference." "Is there?" Sarah studied me. "You're having a crisis of conscience. That's adorable. But let me ask you something. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you do it differently?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," I said finally. "I wouldn't. It's been 3 years since I took over Reed Industries. The company is worth $1.2 billion now. We've expanded into 3 new markets. We've won awards for sustainable development and workplace equality. I've been featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. Everyone wants to know the secret to my success. They want to hear about strategy and vision and leadership principles. I smile in the interviews and give them something quotable. But the real answer is simpler and darker. I stopped believing the world was fair, and I started taking what I wanted. Jonathan lives in Connecticut now. He's on his second wife, a woman 20 years younger who likes his money and doesn't ask difficult questions. He plays golf. He serves on charity boards. He tells people he retired from the family business to pursue other interests. We don't speak. My mother's relatives, the ones who used to tell me how lucky I was to have such a generous father, now tell me how proud he would be. They don't see the irony. Or maybe they do and they just don't care. I hired a private investigator last year to look into my father's finances. Not the company finances, his personal decisions. The will. Why he'd structured it the way he did. The investigator came back with something interesting. My father had updated his will 6 times in the last decade of his life. In the first version, from 15 years ago, I'd been left 40% of the company. Jonathan 60%. Each subsequent update reduced my share. The final version, written 2 months before he died, left me nothing but the trust fund. Why? What changed? The investigator found the answer in my father's journals, which my stepmother had kept. There was an entry from 8 years ago, right after I made partner at Goldman. Katie called today. So proud of her career. She's accomplished more than most men I know. But I worry. She's becoming hard. Ambitious in a way that's unseemly for a woman. I fear she'll end up alone, childless, bitter. Better to leave the company to Jonathan. He'll preserve the family legacy. She'll just turn it into another soulless corporation. I read that entry sitting in my apartment, glass of wine in hand, and I laughed until I cried. My father hadn't disinherited me because I was incompetent. He'd disinherited me because I was too competent. Because my success had frightened him. Because I'd become something he couldn't recognize or control. He'd tried to protect his legacy by giving it to the son who would preserve it. Instead, he'd handed it to me through the sheer force of his own prejudice. So here we are. The end of the story. Or maybe the middle. I'm 35 now. I run a billion-dollar company. I have power, wealth, respect. I also have no relationship with my brother. No romantic partnership. I haven't dated seriously since David. No children. My father's fear came true. I am alone. But I'm not bitter. Bitter is what you feel when you're powerless. What I feel is something colder. Cleaner. I feel victorious. People ask if I have regrets. Journalists. Board members. The therapist I see because successful people are supposed to have therapists. I tell them I regret the necessity of what I did. I regret that we live in a world where a woman has to destroy her own brother to claim what should have been hers by merit. But do I regret the actions themselves? The manipulation? The sabotage? The systematic destruction of Jonathan's confidence and control? No, I don't. Because the alternative was accepting my father's judgment. Accepting that I was worth 0.6% of his legacy because I was born female. Living on Jonathan's charity. Being grateful for scraps. That version of myself, the good daughter, the fair player, the one who accepted her place, she would have been comfortable. Safe. Provided for. She also would have been dead inside. So I killed her. And I became this instead. Here's what I want you to understand. I didn't set out to be a villain. I set out to be treated fairly. The world made me choose between fairness and power. I chose power. And now I want you to make a choice. I want you to answer a question, honestly. If you were given a choice between being good and being powerless, or being ruthless and being powerful, which would you choose? Not which do you think you should choose. Not which sounds better in theory. Which would you actually choose when the chips were down and the inheritance was being read and someone was telling you that your gender made you worth less? Would you accept it with grace? Would you fight fair and lose? Or would you do what I did, learn the rules, master the game, and then burn the whole board down when you realized it was rigged against you from the start? I'm not asking you to approve of what I did. I'm asking you to be honest about what you would do. Because I think most of you know the answer. You'd take the power. You'd just feel worse about it afterward. And maybe that's the only real difference between us. I stopped feeling bad about surviving in a world designed to make me fail. My name is Katherine Reed. I own everything my father tried to keep from me. I won a war against my own family. I became the monster he was afraid I'd become. And I'm fine with that. The only question left is, are you?